and welcome back to the United She Stands podcast. Today we have a candidate for the Ohio State House, and honestly, the minute me and Sarah stopped recording with her, we said we're obsessed with her. Like, we both were like, oh my God, are we obsessed with her? And it was like, yes. And I felt that way the entire time she spoke. She is a very passionate person. You will definitely not be bored listening to this episode. She also speaks in such an easy to understand way. Like, she laid out the issues we talked about in, I think, some of the most clear language I've heard a candidate lay out the issues. So let's get to it. We have Rose Lounsbury on the show today, and she's running for state representative in Ohio's House District 36, which includes Kettering, Oakwood, Riverside, East Dayton, and downtown Dayton. She's a former public school teacher, the daughter of 2 retired teachers, and the mother of teenage triplets, all who go to public school. So needless to say, Rose is deeply committed to protecting and strengthening Ohio's public schools. Her political journey began during the pandemic with the League of Women Voters, where she developed a strong belief that voting rights are the foundation of a healthy democracy. She is committed to fair, accessible elections for all Ohioans. Rose's great-grandfather immigrated to Southeast Ohio in the early 90s to work in the coal mines. He believed Ohio was a place where hard work could lead to a good life. Rose still believes that hardworking families should be able to afford housing, food, and healthcare without fear of financial ruin. This is Rose's second time running for office, and she's running again because the challenges facing Ohio's families are growing, not shrinking. Rose believes Ohio can have strong schools, fair elections, and an economy that works for working people, and she's ready to fight for that future. And you all get to hear it. One other big thing about this candidate, Rose, is she's running in considered one of the most flippable seats for our Ohio State House of Reps. So this is a really important election here in Ohio. We just hope you guys all enjoy hearing from her. We think she's a fabulous candidate. So enjoy.
Hi, Rose. Welcome to the show. We're so excited to have you.
Well, hi, Sarah. Hi, Ashley. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to chat with you.
Yes, we're pumped you're here and spending an hour of your evening with us. So we'll get right to it. You ran for the Ohio State House before back in 2024 and unfortunately came up short, but thankfully for Ohioans, you're running again. At a time when so many people feel so burned out or discouraged in this political climate, what made you decide that now is exactly the moment to stay in this fight?
Well, I think burned out and discouraged are probably pretty mild words for how a lot of people are feeling. I mean, it's a really tough time to be politically engaged. And I think sometimes people think that those of us running for office don't also feel some of those feelings. And I just like to let people know that it's a tough climate out there. And I feel it just as much as anyone. And especially running in 2024, it was my first time. I was a brand new candidate and I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I had no idea I was walking into a Republican bloodbath that year, which is really wonderful that I didn't know that. But afterwards, it was really hard. I could only describe it as sort of like a grief process. And it wasn't just for my race. Honestly, my race was probably one of the less difficult things for me, losing my race. It was the loss of the gerrymandering initiative, the loss of the presidency, the loss of Sherrod, all of those things. And I spent, a good month just walking around the woods in Dayton, going to different metro parks every day with my dog and just kind of letting myself feel the feels as much as I could, because I didn't know if I was going to be able to get myself back into this. I didn't know if I was willing to do it again because it's a huge sacrifice of time. I have 3 kids. I have a business. I have a husband. It's a huge sacrifice of time away from your family and your friendships and your relationships. But after a few months of thinking and talking to people, I just kind of came to the realization that I'm not done with this yet. I am not done. And I think we don't get to choose the time in which we are born. We are born, all of us, into a time where there's really scary things happening in our state and in our nation. There's an authoritarian takeover of our country. Like, that is actually happening right now. None of us chose this. None of us would want to be living through this, but we are. And I think it's on all of us to do what we can do to try to make a difference, because that's the only way that we're going to get through it, is everyone doing something. The lane that I'm able to do, the lane I'm able to drive in, is running for office. And I'm really glad that I can do that. And so I'm doing it. But you too, with your podcast, you are in the lane of educating people in Ohio on what they can do and helping them be informed. There are people out there working with immigrant populations. There are people working with kids. There are people working in hospitals, people working in communities. it takes all of us doing what we can do to get through this, because just electing people, unfortunately, is not going to be enough. We can elect the best people in the world, and it won't make a difference if we as a people, as community members, don't get together and do the work too. So those are some of the reasons. It's because I have 3 kids. They're 16. I have triplets. They're 16 years old. I cannot sit by while they grow up in a state that is being just thrown to the gutter. And I can't sit by and say, oh, I'm okay with that. Let me just turn the TV on. It'll be all right. Well, my daughter loses the rights to control her body. No, I won't. I can't sit back and let it happen. And so did I ever see myself doing this as a kid? No, I never dreamed about running for office. But at a certain point in time, you just realize like the situation is calling us all to do something. And so this is what I feel called to do. And so that's why I'm doing it again.
I'm like very moved by all of that. I was telling Sarah before, like my son is a huge motivator in like what I do. And I can't picture leaving him something this bad. You know, it's like fighting for the next generation. I feel almost so scorned sometimes by like the previous generations for us. I'm like, God, you guys put us in this situation. To your point, we didn't get to pick to be born here, but like a lot of people in previous generations either kind of plugged out of politics or made some very poor decisions. And here we all are. And I just feel so strongly that like the next generation does not deserve that. And it's our job to fix it. And so just very moved by that, Rose. Thank you. Let's talk, speaking of the next generation, let's talk about public education. So as you mentioned, you're a former public school teacher. You are the daughter of 2 retired teachers, and you have 3 children in public schools. How do you see the Ohio State House decisions showing up directly in the classrooms and like families' daily lives? Like how is it impacting students and families?
Yeah, so there are a lot of really direct impacts. I know you all have talked about this on your podcast a few different times. So I haven't been in the classroom in about 10 years. And I'll tell you, even when I was in the classroom, you started to see some of this. I started to realize that the people that were making decisions in Columbus or even in Washington, D.C., they were having an impact in my classroom with my students. And the thing that I saw then, and I still do see now, is high stakes standardized testing, which I know we actually don't talk about a lot anymore, but I do like to still talk about this because one of the things that has happened in public education is high stakes standardized tests have been used to demonize public schools as failing. So we create these tests, we say, oh, these schools are failing. And I'll tell you, as someone who had to administer those tests to students, the bar of proficient is constantly changing. The actual things being tested on the tests are constantly changing. So I remember I taught at a more kind of middle class school, my first teaching job. And my students passed the test. I was a young teacher. I didn't know what I was doing, but they passed. And then I had 5 years experience. I had a master's degree, and I started teaching at a more low income school where the majority of kids were on free and reduced lunch. I'm a much more experienced teacher. I know what I'm doing. The test scores of my students immediately dropped. So if you were just looking at standardized test scores, you would say I'm an ineffective teacher because my students are not passing at the same level that they were passing. Well, they're not passing at the same level because they're poorer. They're less well resourced. And so what high stakes standardized tests have done is they've allowed us to demonize public schools, which allows people to pull their funding. So like this whole voucher program, which I know we might get into a little bit later, a lot of the reasons that public schools have been losing money is because we say, well, they're not doing the job. And so I always say, well, like when were we doing the job? If we're failing now, when were we successful? Like when was success? There's no apples to apples comparison. So that's one of the things that I saw in my classroom was that people in Columbus did not seem to understand that the measure of what a person knows or the knowledge that they have or the growth they have is not as easily measured by a test as you might think that it is. There's a lot more that goes into the education of a human being than what they can report on a test. So that's one of the things that I think continues to be a part of public education that's showing up. And another one specifically in Ohio right now is the very, very concerning blurring of the line between church and state in our schools. And this has happened since I've been out of the classroom. This was not happening so much 10 years ago, but it is very much happening now. You've probably seen, or people listening have probably seen, the LifeWise program coming into schools, taking students out of school to do Bible education classes during the school day. You know, we believe in this country, I think, in a separation of church and state. But all of this is kind of the whole idea is to break down public education, to privatize it. And if you want to even get more in the weeds, to create a Christian nationalist nation of young people who believe a certain ideology. right? Who aren't going to question you because they've been told this is the authority. You don't need to think, right? So critical thinking, that's another thing that I see the line between high stakes testing, because in high stakes testing I remember when I was a young teacher, one of the older teachers said, hey, there's just 3 things they need to know for this test. And she said these 3 things. And I remember I wrote those 3 things down on a sticky note, and I made sure no matter what I was teaching, I taught those 3 things. So what are we doing? We are narrowing the curriculum. When you narrow the curriculum, people don't learn to think critically. When people don't learn to think critically, guess what? You can control them more easily because they have a harder time coming up with their own thoughts. So all of these things, and then you bring religious education into it, it's indoctrination in our schools, in our public schools, and it's really, really scary. Things like LifeWise, the 10 Commandments law, well, it's not called the 10 Commandments law, but it's have historical documents displayed in the classroom. And guess what? One of them is the 10 Commandments, have it up on the wall so that students can see that. I mean, it's just a really concerning line that is very clearly being crossed. And so those are some of the things that I think are showing up in schools. And then beyond that, one of the really damaging things that I think our state house has done is the bullying and discrimination against LGBTQ plus children in our schools. And I can tell you as a teacher, oftentimes schools, one of the only place certain kids feel safe for a variety of reasons, right? Often, unfortunately, especially in some of our less well-resourced school districts, home is not always a safe place. And now with some of these laws discriminating against kids that are already really marginalized, school is less of a safe place. And I just don't know what kind of person you are where you are okay with making scared, marginalized kids more scared. School should be a safe place. It should be a place where kids can learn, where they can be who they are, and where we meet them where they are and we draw out their brilliance. That's what I really think schools should do. Everyone has brilliance. Every kid has something about them that is special and wonderful. And the job of school should be to bring that forth and help them learn so they can contribute to our society in whatever gift that they have. And that is not what is happening in our public school. And a lot of that falls at the feet of the Ohio State House.
I think you said that all perfectly, truly. Like, I was just like, yes, 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 yes. And I'm glad. I feel like a lot of times, like you said, standardized tests aren't brought up, and we will talk more about school vouchers, but the separation of church and state, and specifically within Ohio, the historical documents, 10 Commandments law, and just the protection of the LGBT plus community. I think those are all so prevalent in, public schools. I've been out of high school now for a decade, but still, like, those are things that I even felt in my public schooling. So I just love that you made those 3 points right off the bat. Yes, yes, yes. But now let's talk about school vouchers and funding public education. What do you want voters to understand about how these vouchers actually impact local public schools and communities like in the Dayton area and Kettering?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding among the public about what vouchers actually are. And that's because of the way vouchers were sold to the public. Back when vouchers started in Ohio, there were parameters, and I'm going to talk specifically about the Ed Choice vouchers because there's actually a variety of different kinds of vouchers in Ohio. But I'm going to just talk about the Ed Choice ones because I think they're the most problematic. Prior to 2023, to receive an Ed Choice voucher, you had to meet 2 criteria. 1, you had to be from a low-income family, or 2, you had to live within the boundary lines of a school district considered failing on the Ohio State report card using, of course, those standardized tests. Okay, so those were the 2 requirements. You're from a low-income household or you're living within the boundaries of a quote-unquote failing school district. And so I think a lot of people were okay with that. It's like, well, okay, let's give those kids a voucher. Let's get them an opportunity if maybe they want to go to a different school, a private school or something like that. It was really hard to argue with the program then, although I do think that program also was problematic for various reasons. 2023, everything changed. The guardrails were blown off the program. There were now no requirements to get them. So you could be making any amount of money, you could live anywhere, and now you could get a voucher. This is the program we still have. Now, as a result of that, voucher use exploded in the state. But it wasn't because families were taking their kids out of public schools and putting them in private schools. It was because now all the families who already had their kids in private school, who could already afford to pay the tuition, now they were getting a coupon or a discount on the tuition they could already pay for. I will give you a small example of this. One of my cousins lives in Columbus, sends her kids to Catholic school, always has. That's what she wants to do. They are making fine money. Her husband is some type of doctor, and they can afford to send their kids. And when I was talking to her about this, she said, yeah, Ohio's giving me like $5,000 to send my kids to school now. And she said, I don't need the money, but if someone's going to give you $5,000, you're going to take it, right? If someone gave me $5,000, it would be hard to say no. And so what's happening is, and I don't blame these parents, right? They're being given this money. They're being encouraged by the schools themselves to apply for these vouchers. But what's happening now, if you look at who's receiving Ed Choice vouchers now, the Dayton Daily News, I live in the Dayton area, the Dayton Daily News published a study that they'd done looking at the state data. 90% of Ed Choice voucher recipients are not low-income families, 90%. So people often want to say, vouchers are a social program. They're to help the poor kids. I said, show me another social program where 90% of the recipients are not low income. Can you imagine if this was food stamps? We would be absolutely outraged. And what's so funny to me is, Republicans have always wanted to talk a lot about, welfare queens. That's a big thing, the welfare queens. Well, they've created voucher queens here in Ohio. High income people who do not need the money, who are now receiving the money to send their kids to the school that they were always sending them to anyway. So it is as clear an example of a handout from the middle and working class people to upper class people as you possibly could see. And then the other more insidious thing about this that I think people also need to understand is, where does that money come from, right? So we realize that the program itself is problematic because we're basically giving coupons to high income people, problematic. But where does the coupon money come from? Well, it comes from all of us, the taxpayers, and it comes from our public schools, because the money for vouchers and the money for public schools comes from the same line item in the state budget. They are not separate. So $1 more for this voucher program is $1 less for your local public school. So the money that we are giving to give wealthy people discounts on tuition they can afford, that's coming from the public school in your neighborhood that serves your child, your grandchild, your neighbor kid. That's coming from a public school that must serve every single student, whether they have a disability, whether they speak English as their first language, no matter what their religion is, no matter what type of behavior they have, that public school has to serve them. Does the local private school have to? No, they can and do discriminate against students. There are ways that you get in and ways that you get kicked out. You can't do that in a public school. The doors are open to everyone. And I have no problem with private school, just to be clear, no problem with it. I just think it should be paid for privately. It's a choice. It should be paid for privately. Public dollars should be for public schools, and private dollars should be for private schools. The other thing, that the way it affects people listening, so think about what happens to you, the taxpayer, the property owner, when your public school is getting less money, right? Because it's coming from the same pot. Now we're giving over $1 billion a year to a voucher program, mostly funding people who could already afford the tuition. There's $1 billion less in the pot. Guess what? Your public school is getting less money from the state. What are they going to do? They're going to come to you with another property tax levy to make up the difference. And you know this because they did it last year or the year before, or they're planning to do it this May or November. You know that. That's why. It's not that your school is being irresponsible with the funds. It's not that there's fiscal mismanagement, because guess what? They have to open up their books to the state and report how they're spending their money. Does that private school down the street that's getting your tax dollars have to do that? No, sir. They do not have to. Not a single dollar. That's the other thing. Not a single dollar of the over $1 billion we spend on vouchers in this state is ever audited. Not $1. We have no idea how that money is being spent. So those are just the things I want people to understand about vouchers, is that this is welfare for the wealthy, that it's taking away from your public school, which is doing a common good of educating every single child, and that it's raising your taxes. So no matter which of those things gets your blood boiling, and one of them should, you should be opposed to vouchers. I don't see anyone who should actually be in support of them. So those are just a few things for people to understand.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that also clearly.
I was just going to say, I feel like that was the best explanation I've gotten.
Yes, we've definitely talked education. I think we're very aware of the voucher situation, but I'm not sure that anyone we've had on, or that any us personally, have been able to lay it out like you just did. I think that was just so well laid out. I think too, just screams at me is the hypocrisy of the Republican Party, which we could do 80 shows on, but it's just so infuriating because, to your point, they are so anti quote unquote handout of any sort unless it benefits the wealthy. And here we see it once again. And then, yes, that's just so infuriating. Okay, let's move on to something that I'm sure you're going to be just as fired up about: voting rights.
Yes.
So,
Welcome
we
to the
know,
hill I will die on. Here we are.
I love it. Okay, so we know your political journey kind of started with the League of Women Voters, who is a nonpartisan organization that primarily fights for voting rights. So, what specifically worries you most about the direction of voting rights and fair maps here in Ohio?
Well, probably the thing that worries me the most are the very naked voter suppression tactics that are being passed through our Ohio State House. So I know you all talked about recently the 4-day grace period for absentee ballots. So this is just one example. So if you mailed in your absentee ballots, maybe you're elderly or you're disabled or you're just a busy working parent and you don't have time to actually go somewhere on voting day and you're going to mail it in. It used to be that if the mail was a little late, they gave you 4 days. If it was postmarked before election day, 4 days to get there. That has now been eliminated. And so the numbers that I've heard are about 7,000 or 8,000 votes in Ohio will just be thrown in the trash because they didn't get there. The mail was late. And as we all know, the mail can be late. So voter suppression tactics like that, people are going to probably continue to vote the way they've always voted. If they've been mail-in voters, they're going to continue to be mail-in voters, and some of those votes are not going to count, which in a lot of elections like mine, 7,000 votes, 1,000 votes, 500 votes, that makes a difference in a lot of our elections. So there's that, and then there's also the Ohio SAVE Act, which requires documentary proof of citizenship in order to register to vote. And so what that means is, especially for married women, if you, like me, you change your last name when you're married, you need proof that you're a citizen. Well, the only proof you have of being a citizen is either a birth certificate or a passport. Well, my passport does not, my birth certificate does not match my current last name. I happen to have a passport, but not everybody does. In fact, the executive director of our League of Women Voters here in Dayton, when she went to change her voter registration because she moved, she had to come back to the Board of Elections twice because she didn't have a passport. She had to bring her marriage license to the Board of Elections to change her voter registration. She's the executive director of the Dayton League of Women Voters and did not bring the proper documentation to change voter registration. So I think these are things that a lot of people are not going to be aware of. People are going to show up expecting that they can vote. They're not going to have the right documentation. They're going to mail their things in and think that their vote is happening. So these are things that, when I think about all of the rights that we all care about, and everybody has the rights they care about the most. There's like reproductive rights and LGBTQ plus rights and workers' rights. We all have our rights that we care about. But to me, the bedrock right, the thing that all the other rights stand upon is voting rights. It is like the jugular. Like, as long as you have voting rights, as long as your vote matters, you can affect all of those other things, right? You can fight for marriage equality, you can fight for this or that, economic equality. But if your vote doesn't matter, or you're voting and it doesn't count in any way, and it's more just like a performative thing that we kind of do so it looks like democracy, that's when we're really in trouble. And that's what I see in Ohio and nationally. It's kind of this like going for the jugular, like going after voting rights, going after the ability of women, minorities, poor people, their ability to have their voice heard. And it can seem kind of trivial. Someone just sent me this picture on Facebook the other day. It was a picture of one of the suffragists. And I don't know how much you know about this, but the women who fought for the right to vote, a lot of them were arrested, jailed, and they went on hunger strikes because that was their way of showing resistance. And then they were force fed in prison. And so one of the guards took a picture and shared it out of this picture of this woman being strapped and held down and force fed. And it's like a pretty awful thing. We think about voting rights and we forget what people did to try to secure these rights and how these rights are the bedrock of all the progress that women have made or minorities have made. Like when they wanted to keep people in the Jim Crow South, keep Black people oppressed, you keep them from voting. Like it's so predictable. You go after voting, you go after their ability to have their voice heard. That is what keeps people held down every single time. And it's sometimes just amazing to me that we don't see this. This is what's happening in our country is they're trying to make voting difficult. And I know we're going to talk about gerrymandering too. That's just another side of this coin. Like you make it difficult to vote. You make it hard to change your voter registration. You got to jump through all these hoops, bring back this documentation. However, Then if you actually do all of that, you actually get to vote, you cast your ballot. Well, guess what? It may not even matter. It might just be a show. And so to me, if we care about democracy, which I think we do, I'm guessing the people listening to this podcast definitely do, we have to care about voting rights as almost like the most important thing. That's why I said like this is the hill that I will die on, because if this dies, democracy dies. There's no other way to go about it. And so we have to fight for it. We have to be aware of it. We have to tell people, and we have to push back. And we have to elect people to our state houses who are not going to go along with this, who are going to push back against it. So yeah, so that's a few of my thoughts on voting rights.
We agree with every single one of them. And I just love your passion, because that's exactly how we feel about voting rights here at United She Stands as well. So voting rights is one jugular. I would argue there's two jugulars, and the other one that we have alluded to, fair maps. And in Ohio, we don't have fair maps. We are living under extremely gerrymandered districts. So can you talk a little bit about that and what accountability would look like if the legislature actually respected the will of the voters?
Yeah, well, if the legislature respected the will of the voters, we would have ended gerrymandering, I think, in 2015 and 2018. I mean, we have twice passed, but by large margins, like 70%. Constitutional amendments. The people of Ohio do not want gerrymandering. And that's both sides of the aisle, because I think at the base of it, people want their vote to matter. They want their voice to be heard. And in a representative democracy, they want their representatives to actually represent them. Okay, so one of the things that I want people to understand about gerrymandering is the reason that Republicans and Democrats in Democratic states do it. And the reason is because it gives you a lot of power. And so one of the things that I did early in my campaign, in my 2024 campaign, I did a lot of late night Googling of questions. I was trying to figure stuff out. And so one night I was like, how long have Republicans been in charge in Ohio? And I Googled exactly that. How long have Republicans been in charge in Ohio? And I found this image. I'm going to have to do multiple things. Here we go. We're just going to bring it across like that. Okay, you see that? Let's do it again. So you get it from the beginning. This is 1992. 1992. We're going all the way to 2026. Okay. So what this shows you is that for about 7 of the last 34 years, Republicans have held a legislative trifecta in our state. That means they've held the governorship, the Senate, and the House. There have only been a few years where Democrats even had 2 of those 3. Those were the 2 of the Ted Strickland years. We had 2 of the 3. We've never had a trifecta. And so when we think about, well, why the gerrymandering? Well, it's to preserve this. It's to preserve this because this is power. And so what I want people to think about is, you think about the metrics in Ohio of the things that we would use to determine like if the state's doing well, things like education, healthcare, economy, all of those metrics have decreased over the last 20 to 30 years. So if Republican control led to good outcomes for Ohio, we should have seen it by now. If you think that there's something wrong in Ohio, you don't like something about the state, your taxes are too high, your doctor's bill is too expensive, your kids aren't getting as good of education, you can't afford to send them to college, you can't afford childcare, guess who's to blame? Guess who's to blame? Okay?
All those red boxes.
There's nobody else to blame. Right? This is the work of Republicans. They've had the time to fix these things. That represents 34 years. They've had the time and they've had the power. Right? If you've had the time and the power to fix things and you haven't fixed them, the only thing we conclude is you don't care to fix those things. You actually don't. And so gerrymandering is an attempt to lock in that kind of power. And the thing about gerrymandering for people to understand is gerrymandering is what creates the extremism that we see. Because when you're in a gerrymandered district, for example, if it was only a Republican could ever win, right? The Democrat can run, but they're never going to win. So your only competition is a person who's more Republican than you. And so people are constantly being primaried if they're not going with the party line. If they're trying to be too bipartisan, they're being primaried by someone who's a little more to the right. And in a Democratic district, that can happen the same way, someone who's a little more to the left. And so the reason that I think gerrymandering is so egregious is because we can go through the act of voting and we can do all the things, but a lot of times our votes don't even matter because it's already predetermined. It's sort of like the appearance of democracy, just like Russia, Hungary, Venezuela, they go and they vote, right? It's all kind of a very pretty thing to do, but it doesn't really matter. And Ohio, we're not terribly far from that in some of our elections, right? Our state rep, state senate, U.S. Congress. Now, there are some things that aren't gerrymandered. The governorship, statewide elections, state senate. But a lot of our elections, for people who are making decisions like in the Ohio State House, all of those seats are gerrymandered. Every single one of them is, right? Because it's been drawn to give these people an advantage or those people an advantage. And so it creates this extreme state. And, a friend of mine, so I said at the beginning that one of the biggest losses for me was the anti-gerrymandering initiative in 2024. And Michigan, they had the 15-member redistricting commission, and we were modeling our amendment off of what they have. And so I was talking to a friend of mine a few months ago who lives there. He said, as soon as they passed that in Michigan, as soon as it passed, you saw the Republicans start to moderate in the way they spoke and the things they talked about, because now they had to appeal to their voters. And so what I want people to understand is that ending gerrymandering is really good for all of us, because it means that our politicians will have to listen to us because there's accountability for them. They have to earn your vote. If someone doesn't have to earn your vote, what you say doesn't really matter to them. And I think that's the thing people don't understand. If you're a Republican, you're just like, yeah, Republicans are winning. I'm like, yeah, but they don't have to listen to you either, right? They don't care any more about what you have to say than what I have to say, because your vote and my vote don't matter for them that much. So anyway, gerrymandering is something that I think we're not going to have fairness in Ohio and fair representation until we end it. And unfortunately, we're farther away from it than I want to be, but I think we will. We'll get another amendment on the ballot, but, we can't really change things until that ends.
Yeah, absolutely. That graphic you showed off, I think it's from Ballotpedia. I have also found that graphic, and I've been trying to find a good way to get it into a graphic friendly version on social media, because I'm like, this is what every Ohioan should see.
We just need a clip, Rose. Yeah. Moving it back and forth.
Video of you just going across the board. Yeah, it's just literally Republicans have had their shot. If you are not better off, if you think you're in a worse place today, it's your state politicians. And guess who's controlled our state house for 4 decades? Because to your point, even when Democrats maybe had the governorship or the Senate, we never had it all. We've never been able to just come in and actually enact any left-leaning policies or any working family policies, I should say. Which leads us into working families. Let's talk a little bit about that. What are the biggest ways that the Ohio legislature is failing working families now and over the past couple decades, and what can be done at the state level to fix some of it?
Yeah, so I think one of the big things is a lot of the hypocrisy. There's a lot of saying we care about kids, saying we care about families, saying we want young people to stay in the state and make Ohio great. But then there's a lot of passing of policies that don't take care of families, that don't take care of kids, that actually drive young people out of our state. I actually saw a study from some moving companies. I don't know if you both have seen this, but the Ohio Capital Journal and some other places picked it up. There are some moving companies, and they do studies on the moving trucks, like how many people are renting moving trucks to move out of Ohio and how many people are renting their trucks to move in. And what they determined was that we have more trucks being rented to move out than to move in. And that is indicative of a state that is not attracting people. People are having a difficult time affording basic things like groceries, their rent, their mortgage, healthcare, those sorts of things. So I think one of the ways that they're failing families is a lot of talk about helping them, but not an actual lot of helping them. And a big part of that is the way that taxes are being assessed in the state. And I know you all have had people talk more about taxes, but one of the reasons that a lot of our metrics are so low in Ohio is because the tax burden has been shifted more and more on working families, middle-class people, working-class people. So just one example, the schools that we talked about, when the State House does not fund schools because they're giving money to vouchers, your schools are going to come to you to ask for more money. That's going to happen in other ways. So we recently passed a flat tax, 2.75% income tax. That means people making, $1 million a year are going to pay the same income tax as people making, less than $50,000 a year. So that means the state will have less money. That means they're going to have less money to give to your libraries, your local governments, your schools, your parks, all the things that make communities a great place to live. When families are looking for a place to raise their kids, they're looking at parks and green spaces. And is there a community center that offers things for kids and families to do? Well, all of those things cost money. and local governments get money from the state. When the state has less money to give because they're giving tax breaks, right? Then your local community is going to say, hey, if we want to keep the senior center, we're going to need to raise your property taxes to keep that. If we want to keep these parks and we want them to be nice places for the kids to play, or we want the community swimming pool to stay open next summer, we're going to need you to pay more for that. So these are ways that state house policies are affecting all of us in the communities where they live, and failing families, failing young people. I'll be honest with you, I have 3 16-year-olds. We're looking at colleges in Canada. And that is because I am not convinced that our colleges are great places. I mean, we are censoring what we can teach at our public colleges and universities in Ohio, not to mention that we're not funding them properly, right? We're censoring the actual education that can be taught to our young people. So families like me that have the option of maybe sending them somewhere else are looking at other places to send our young people. And so I think that, all of these things originate in policy at the state house. And if we had more representation of the things people actually care about, we could change these things, right? We could make Ohio a place that attracts young families. I mean, my husband and I moved here 20 years ago because we're like, oh, Ohio, it's a great place, right? It's a great place to raise a family, great place to raise our kids. And I still very much believe that. But the Ohio that I'm raising my kids in now is not the Ohio that I feel like I moved to 20 years ago. And that is a problem. That's a problem for the future of our state, no matter what side of the aisle you are on, because if we don't keep young people here, our state cannot grow and it cannot advance. And that's a problem for all of us. So we need to elect better people.
Truly. And the state will just be more and more red if young people are getting, I want to say, pushed out, because there's not a lot of great things to stay here for at the moment. So yeah, totally. So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about healthcare, something else that is a big issue, unfortunately. You have said that no one should go bankrupt because of healthcare costs, especially due to an unexpected diagnosis. And the fact that some people could call this radical is insane, but we absolutely agree with you. What role should the state play in protecting families from medical debt and healthcare costs that can bring them, tumbling down?
It's really funny because before this podcast, I was at a community event where, it's the anniversary of the Women's March today. I know we're recording this in January. And I ran into one of my friends who is a doctor, and he does a lot of activism. And I said, Dr. Dawn, I'm going to do this podcast. They're going to ask me about healthcare and what the state could do. And 30 minutes later, after he went through this long explanation, I said, okay, so what I'm getting from this, Dr. Dawn, is that this is a complex situation. Like, healthcare is a complex issue that has a lot of problems. And to sum it up for people like me, because I interact with the healthcare system as a patient, as a person entering the healthcare system saying, please don't let me die. Please take care of me. Please take care of my kids. That's how I interact with the healthcare system. The only thing that will ever truly resolve a lot of those complex issues that Dr. Dawn was talking to me about is a universal healthcare system. That is the pie in the sky, right? And it's not even that pie in the sky because like most industrialized nations have this.
Right. Yeah, everyone else but us does this, but it's fine.
It's not that we're lacking models, y'all. Like, we can see how it's done, but there is not currently, with the way politics is today, there's not the political will to do it. So things that we can do. So I think about with healthcare, what doctors do is they take a Hippocratic oath when they are sworn in as doctors to do no harm. I think our politicians should be taking the same oath, just do no harm. Because right now, when it comes to healthcare, we have people up in the State House who are doing actual harm to people's health. So you may be aware of the Ohio State House passing some legislation that includes trigger language for Medicaid, basically meaning that if the federal government reduces Medicaid spending below 90% of the current spending, Ohio will just kick like 700,000 people off of Medicaid expansion. That's harm. Taking away someone's health care is harm. And so until we can get to the point where there is enough political will, meaning we have a critical mass of people who actually care about doing the hard work to create a healthcare system that serves all of us. And I hope I live to see that. But until that happens, we need people who are going to create policies that do not make things worse, right? That do not kick people off, that deal with our current system the best we can and try to provide healthcare to people as much as we can. And a big thing that I think we should be doing is, DeWine created that working group of people about property taxes, and they brought all the different people, and they what they came up with was probably not that fantastic, but at least we brought people together to talk about it and come up with some solutions. I would love to see an actual working group of healthcare professionals, people who are affected by maternal health deserts, people who are, hospital administrators, like people coming together and talking about what are the issues, what can we do, working within the broken system that we're in until we can get enough will to make an actual better system within this not perfect system. What can we do to cause less harm to people? And I think that's going to require a lot of voices at the table, people who are actually on the ground. Because one of the things is kind of going back to where we talked at the beginning when I was a teacher in the classroom and you see the effect of policy at the State House in your classroom. I would never want to, as someone who has not worked in hospitals, not been a healthcare professional, make decisions that I think sound great and realize that that's going to look really different in an ER and in a family care practice. So I think it's really important that we bring experts to the table who are doing the work on the front lines, who can actually help inform policy that will hopefully help people in Ohio be better able to afford healthcare and access healthcare.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think expertise, what a wild idea these days, but I love it. And I just want to say, on the political will thing, it almost ties back to gerrymandering, because nowadays, actually, the majority of Americans do support or think a single payer or universal type healthcare is a good thing, but that's not a thing politicians will do, right? Big insurance companies pay for politicians. We know how it works. So it all comes back to gerrymandering. If we could get politicians who actually represent the will of the voters, we could do things like...
Well, it comes back to gerrymandering and the money in politics.
Yeah, money.
The third jugular.
Yeah, the third jugular. Yeah, we're not even talking about
a lot of jugulars here. But yeah, because that's the other problem. It's in politics, you have the elected people, you have the people who actually elect them, but in the middle, you have the special interests, the large corporations, the donors, right? And so really, while the elected should be listening to the people who elected them, they're listening to those people in the middle. And therein is why the political will is lacking.
Yeah. Yep.
And so there's, we're not lacking for problems to solve here, folks. I guess that's what we come down to.
Absolutely. Okay, we're going to kind of stay on the healthcare vibes here. So let's talk about reproductive rights. We know those have been basically constantly under threat, even after, as Ohioans, we all passed issue 1 in 2023. Has it been that long already? So what should Ohioans, I guess, be paying attention to or watching for from our lawmakers at the State House who are trying to undermine those protections?
Yeah, so one of the big things we want to watch for is access. So you can let something be legal and then just cut off the ability to access it. And that is what's happening in our State House, especially in terms of abortion care. So I actually am on an ad hoc member on the Planned Parenthood of Southwest Ohio Development Committee. So I get to sit in on some conversations about some of these things. And there have been really difficult decisions that reproductive health providers have had to make. I know here in Southwest Ohio, because, and this was a federal government decision, if a clinic provides abortion services, we're cut off from receiving Medicaid funding. As a result of that, Planned Parenthood closed 2 of its clinics, non-surgical clinics. So this was a clinic in Springfield and a clinic in Hamilton. These are not high-income areas. So these were clinics serving a lower resource population, doing things like cancer screening, birth control, pregnancy tests, basic things, basic healthcare. So because abortion has become such a as a political tool, as an issue, it's preventing people from getting access to basic reproductive health care. And when you don't have access to that type of health care, your chance of developing cancer, having an unwanted pregnancy, all of those things increase. And then, if you have an unwanted pregnancy and then you would rely on Medicaid, you don't have access to the abortion services either, because we're shutting down clinics. So these are some of the things. It's access is a big issue, and you see that with the laws trying to, the personhood laws, the mifepristone, I don't know if I'm saying that right, trying to declassify that or make it a black box drug where you can't get it through telehealth. So it's shutting off, it's not going after the legality of it, but shutting off access to it. And that's what we need to be on the lookout for. And one of the things to kind of tell people something they can do, because I think that a lot of times we hear these things, we're like, oh my gosh, everything sucks. And so this was something that I learned from being on the development committee of Planned Parenthood Southwest is if you are a person who seeks reproductive health care for yourself, your daughter, use Planned Parenthood, especially if you have private insurance that Planned Parenthood can bill. So I know for my own self, my daughter wanted birth control pills to regulate her cycle. I hope she never listens to this podcast and I'm telling her personal business. But I wouldn't have considered taking her to Planned Parenthood because in my mind, I thought, well, that's for people who can't afford the normal doctor. But I took her specifically to Planned Parenthood because I knew that my insurance would pay for it and help keep Planned Parenthood afloat. So that's just something like we can all do if we're using reproductive health care. If you have the option to choose Planned Parenthood and maybe you wouldn't have in the past, that's something that you can do to help make a difference. And help keep these places that are providing vital medical health care, medical services, help keep them afloat during this time.
I think that's such a great call out. I've never heard that. I've never heard any Democrats say don't go to Planned Parenthood, but I've never heard hey, yeah, if you have private insurance, go there, help fund them.
I didn't know you could do that.
That's great to know. Thank you
Call
for sharing that.
Call and make an appointment.
Yeah.
And also something to know, a lot of people think Planned Parenthood is just abortion, and it is not. Like in Dayton, we do have a surgical clinic, but we have just a clinic. And so there's no protesters outside. There's none of those people. You just make an appointment. You go in like any other doctor's office, and she just had her appointment like anybody would at any normal doctor's office. So I think there's also even that some of us as progressives might have around Planned Parenthood that it's just for abortion. You only go there if you need abortion. No. You can go there for any type of reproductive health care, and we should be supporting it because if anybody's under attack in this environment, it is places like Planned Parenthood that are under attack.
Yeah, totally. And we're big fans of Planned Parenthood of Southwest Ohio because we love Nan Whaley. So
yes, I do too.
Big fan of Nan. Okay, Rose, we have one more heavy topic for you, and then we'll start to talk about hope and all those happy things. But we're going to talk about gun safety. So often, for whatever reason, gun safety gets framed as controversial, but you talk about it as a public safety issue. What common sense steps do you support that would make communities safer without infringing on responsible ownership?
Yeah, so I always like people to know that I am a gun owner. I grew up in a rural area. Everybody owned guns. It's very normal in my background to have guns. My husband is a hunter. All of my kids are hunters. My freezer is full of venison. This is a very unusual thing in like a normal suburb, but this is our life. And so we have 2 gun safes in the house. We have more guns than people in our house. And so I like people to know that gun ownership is not, it's something that can exist alongside gun safety laws. These are not opposed ideas. And so some of the things, and I actually consulted with my husband because I knew you were going to ask me this question, some of the things that he supports as someone who's been a lifelong gun owner. And some of the things that I think we could do would be like mandatory waiting periods, because one of the things we don't often think about when we think of gun violence, we often think of like active shooters or someone, doing something to harm someone else. But a lot of gun violence and gun deaths are suicide. And so a waiting period when someone purchases, especially for handguns, a waiting period can just give somebody the time to maybe talk to someone, rethink their decisions, go get some help, and that can save lives. So a mandatory waiting period is something that I really think a lot of people, gun owners and non-gun owners, could get on board with. Red flag laws and background checks, again, basic things that aren't going to prevent someone from owning a gun, but can keep the guns out of the hands of people who would do harm. Limiting magazines. So magazines are, when you see people like Rambo, they've got all of those bullets like in almost like a curve under the gun, limiting those to 10 rounds. Because in the event of a mass shooting, which we did have here in Dayton, Ohio, in the district that I'm running in, if someone doesn't have if they have 30 rounds, that's 30 bullets they can shoot before they have to reload. Those seconds that require someone to reload are someone's life. So limiting there's no real reason that anyone needs to have more than 10 rounds in a gun. And also, I think something in Ohio that, I've seen some of our cities try and fail, because the legislature wouldn't allow them, are allowing cities to make laws around guns that make sense for their communities. I know in Columbus, they wanted safe storage laws. Well, the legislature would not allow them to have safe storage for handguns. And handguns not only are used in suicides, but those are often the kinds of guns that kids will find under a bed, in a closet. And we have gun deaths every year by kids finding guns that are loaded. So having safe storage laws, allowing cities to make those laws, or open carry laws, allowing cities to make their own open carry laws. So something that's a little ridiculous, like if you go to a public park and like imagine you're sitting by the sandbox where little kids are playing in the sand, there are things you cannot do there. You can't drink a beer, you can't smoke a cigarette. But guess what you can do in Ohio? You could have a gun. You could clean your AR-15 right there next to the sandbox. But you can't drink a beer. I think cities should be allowed to make laws that make sense around open carry and around safety for their own cities. And the legislature, when cities have tried this, have continuously blocked them from doing it. So as a gun owner, as someone with guns in my house, these are things that I feel we can do, and that this respects the rights of responsible gun owners to carry arms, because we're always going to have guns in this country, right? We have a Second Amendment right to bear arms, and there's a very good reason for that. Like, I just watched The American Revolution, that like Ken Burns 12-hour documentary, which I highly recommend. But if you actually learn about the history of our country, like we became a nation because of militias. And so there's a reason that it was important to the founders that we have that right. But that doesn't mean we can't make our cities and communities safe with simple steps, right? These are not mutually exclusive things. And I think if we bring people together to talk about this, I really do think that there is more consensus on this than we think. And this is another example of how special interests and extremism and gerrymandering, as we've talked to, all roads lead to gerrymandering, apparently, in this conversation. Those are the reasons that we have these extreme laws around gun ownership, because the vast majority of Americans want their communities to be safe. They want their kids and grandkids to be safe in their homes. It is a very small portion of the population that would oppose any and all gun safety laws. So those are some of my thoughts on that one.
Yeah, I think thank you for just walking us through that. I think those are all, to your point, things that no matter which side of the aisle you are on, you can get behind. To your point, every town has put out stats. Every town or Moms Demand, one of them. But like the majority of Americans like are for safe storage. It's like, and not even like a small majority, like 70% or something. It's like large numbers. And so it's very frustrating that the NRA, special interest groups, the gun lobby get in the way of us saving lives. At the end of the day, people die because of this. And it's one of my most like issues I'll get the most upset and fired up about. I sometimes can't even like rationally talk about it. So thank you for very rationally speaking to solutions. All right, let's talk. We're going to start to wrap up a little bit. So for listeners who care deeply, they're listening to this podcast, they care deeply about our democracy, they care about helping working families and not just the elite and billionaire class, but they feel unsure of how to help, or they don't kind of know what to do right in this moment, especially when it comes to our state house. What's one thing that folks could do right now to make a difference in state house races across Ohio like yours?
Yeah, so there are things people can do now. So we're recording this in January, and there are things people can do later as the election gets closer. So the thing that you could do now that would be most helpful to state house races like mine or anyone else running for the state legislature is make a donation. And I know like nobody wants to hear that. They're like, oh, she's going to save money. Yes. And why will I say that? Well, it's because Republicans are going to outraise us 2-1 if we're lucky. Okay. We talked a little bit about money in politics being the third jugular, just to give you like some understanding of what someone like me is up against. I am sitting in the top most competitive seat in the entire Ohio state. The Ohio legislature, the state house, this is the only flippable seat that Kamala Harris won, my district. Okay. So I can flip it. I can win it. I want to. However, I know that in my last race, I raised $290,000 to run, which is a ridiculous amount of money. My opponent had $600,000 to run against me. And I was like doing good. If we only get outraised 2-1, we're doing well. So that's what people like me are up against. And sometimes people think, well, I don't have $290,000. I've had high school kids send me $10. I've had college kids send me $15. And I will tell you that those donations actually mean almost more to me than anything, because, $10 to a high school kid is a lot of money. So don't think that even if you don't have a lot of money to donate, that it's not worth it, because everything helps. And so that is one way that you can help right now in these cold months when there's not a lot going on. As we get to the warmer months, things that you can do to help are reach out to those candidates' campaigns and find out what they need in terms of volunteers. So I know a lot of these state house races, there's a field game. There's a lot of door knocking. Maybe they need people to staff events. They might need people to, walk in parades. One of the things I would have people do is like, hey, there's a, sauerkraut festival at this town. I can't go because I have to knock doors, but can you put my t-shirt on and go and take a picture of yourself by the sauerkraut sign? Whatever it was. So there are lots of things that candidates need, especially as it gets closer and the race starts to heat up. But that's something, if you wanted to do something now, you could support them with whatever you've got financially. And then as it gets closer, you can support them with whatever you can do more physically.
Yeah. Rose, we will have your website in the show notes so folks can find you and give that donation if they are able to. That's roseforohio.com. Like I said, it'll be in the show notes. Real quick, I did want to ask you, do you have a primary opponent?
No, not as of right now.
Okay, so I still want everyone in your district to go vote in your primary because there's other things on the ballot, but also you should still vote for Rose. But just was curious if that was something you were dealing with as well.
Yeah.
Or if it was just going to be primarily November.
Yeah, there's obviously still time for somebody to turn a petition in, but no one has pulled as far as I can tell. So I don't think I will have one.
Okay. When this airs, we will officially know because I think this airs
Yeah.
a little later in February, but okay.
Yes, we'll know by February 4th. So fingers crossed no one comes out of the woodwork.
Yeah, and you can just focus on going up against the GOP there.
We have one last question for you, Rose, and I just know you're going to have a great answer to this. What gives you hope for our state of Ohio?
Yeah, so the thing that probably gives me the most hope are our young people. So during my last campaign, I had this group of high school students, and they called themselves Students for Rose, and they came out and they did all sorts of work for me. They knocked doors for me. They would staff events for me. They even gave speeches. Some of them they were on the speech and debate team. Some of them were, and so they would give speeches like introducing me at events. So my high school students probably give me the most hope because, when you're in high school and you're young, it's like everything is future, right? Everything is in front of you. And so when I often look at them, because they're the age of my own kids, you feel worried for them. You want everything to be okay. But the beautiful thing about young people is most of them, they're very optimistic because everything about their life is the future. And generally they are very optimistic. And so what's exciting for me this campaign is I have my high schoolers from the town that I live in, Oakwood. They have joined forces now with high schoolers. Apparently, there is an Ohio High School Democrats of America. There's chapters in all states.
We follow them on social media. Yes, that's accurate.
Of the Ohioan lives in Kettering, which is like one of the areas of my district. And so he came over and brought his people. So now we got a coalition of high schoolers from different schools around the area who are working together. And they give me a lot of hope because I think a lot of times politicians, they talk about the future and we're doing this for the kids. But like, how often do people actually talk to the kids? I was in the garage with the kids talking to them last weekend as we were talking about how they could help my campaign. So it's really important to me that if we're building a better future for Ohio, that we talk to the people who are inheriting that future and that we get them involved. And so it gives me hope to see young people caring about politics, young people involved in politics. And I'll tell you, when I lost in 2024, some of the young women, they wrote me like the nicest text messages after I lost, just like, you did a great job and we believe in you. And it was so hard for me because it's like, I really wanted to win for them, like I wanted it to be better for them. And luckily they were juniors, they're seniors this year, so they're still with me. And I'm hoping that, that this can be the year that we win it for them because it really is, at the end of the day, like I am a mom of 3 teenagers and I'm doing what I'm doing because I want Ohio to be better for them and for people like them. And so knowing that people their age are interested in spending their free time being involved in my campaign gives me a lot of hope.
That's incredible.
That gives me a lot of hope too, and a lot of tears in my eyes. That made me tear up and gave me chills. And I'm just so happy that you have that support from young folks.
Thank you.
Rose, thank you so much for joining us. I'm so excited about your candidacy and hopefully flipping your seat in November. We will do anything we can to support you. So yes, very excited for you. And thank you so much for the time tonight. I know it's, to your point, it's a lot of time and effort to run a campaign. You are a mom of 3, and you spent an hour with us this evening, so we so appreciate it.
Thank you both.
Thank you
for all that you both do as well, because it takes all of us.
It does. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Rose.
Thank you.